Something monstrous is mowing down Russia's ranks. It's not bullets or bombs. It isn't even Ukraine's drones, as damaging as those flying death machines have been to Russia's army. What is killing Putin's men is far more sinister, and it's an enemy as old as time itself. The Russian military is diseased, literally. The zombie plague is devouring Putin's forces as it targets one of the most vulnerable parts of a Russian's body, the eyes. Let's imagine that you are a Russian soldier for a moment. Posted to the front lines, you're already shocked at how ancient your country's tactics seem to be. There are no combined assaults using Russia's air and ground forces. You spent most of your time digging trenches that you'll hide in whenever Ukraine's drones fly by. Your trench is now your home. Dank, damp, filled with the detritus of war, and in no way comfortable. Every time you look around, you see something you never thought you would see on the battlefield. Mice. Scores of them. When you lie your head down to sleep, they crawl over you. Your rations and your water are targets for the mice, and their droppings are everywhere. Mixed into the mud of your trench, the stench that the mice generate is enough to make your eyes water. But soon that water is going to be replaced by something much worse. It all starts slowly. You start running a fever, and you shrug it off. Getting sick is part and parcel of being in such terrible conditions, but soon the abdominal pains start. You're practically doubling over every time your commander orders you to do something. You're called lazy, threatened with being sent on a suicidal assault against Ukraine's defenses. But there's nothing you can do about it. You want to weep, but there's something other than tears leaking from your eyes. It's red, sticky, and it's the precise thing that no soldier wants to see on the battlefield. This is blood, and it's coming from your eyes. As horrifying as all of this sounds, this nightmare scenario is precisely what Russia's soldiers now face on the front lines in Ukraine. That's according to a report by The Telegraph, which says that what is colloquially known as mouse fever has been infecting one of the most notorious units in the Russian military. The Akhmat battalion, whose members are sometimes referred to as Russia's TikTok soldiers, has been afflicted with a few confirmed and several alleged cases of a disease that ruin their guts, eyes, and kidneys, all because Russia has forced them to fight in rodent-infested trenches from which there is no escape from the causes of the disease. Mouse fever, or to give it its medical name, hemorrhagic fever with renal syndrome, or HFRS, is far from the only disease that is ripping through Putin's forces. Stick with us because it gets a whole lot worse than even what we're about to tell you. But as for HFRS, the disease is characterized by the sorts of symptoms we told you about in our scenario. The infected person develops a fever and abdominal pain. Not long after, the soldier's blood pressure drops off a cliff. If the disease isn't caught in time, blood starts to literally seep out of the soldier's eyes in what must make the infected soldier look like something out of a zombie movie. Kidney failure follows this bleeding, and dependent on the strain of HFRS, the soldier faces a fatality rate that climbs as high as 38%. The one saving grace for the soldiers serving with the infected is that the disease can't be spread from person to person. Instead, it comes from the feces, urine, and saliva left behind by infected rodents. And if you think that's a problem that can be solved, then think again. Infestations of mice have been plaguing Russia's soldiers, quite literally, for much of Putin's war. Back in January 2024, CNN reported that rats and mice were swarming the trenches being built in Ukraine in what is said was a grisly echo of World War I. Russia isn't the only side in the conflict that has experienced this phenomenon. Ukraine has too, though it would at least care about its infected soldiers should they catch the disease. Russia doesn't care, and that means the disease could become a death sentence. While only 3 cases are confirmed, limited medical access and movement among units means more cases could be undetected, heightening potential for wider transmission and operational disruption, health intelligence firm Airfinity says of the spread of mouse fever among Russia's forces. One of the medics from the Akhmat battalion, who goes by the call sign Sharma, says that dealing with HFRS is becoming practically unavoidable. Mice are everywhere. We wake up because they run across us. We even wrestle over cans of condensed milk. Imagine having to fight a mouse for milk. Russia has become the Toms to the trench-based Jerrys, and the Toms are losing. Right now, there is no real cure for HFRS. All that anybody can do is treat the symptoms, as the vaccines for the disease are only approved for use in South Korea and China, and even then, they only target specific strains. For Russia's soldiers, the only real choice if they start bleeding out of the eyes is to shut up and charge forward. They're dying anyway, so they may as well taste some of Ukraine's ammo while doing it. Does that sound callous? Perhaps. But we all know that this will be the Russian response because, as we told you earlier, it somehow gets far worse than a zombie virus that makes blood gush from people's eye sockets. As visually horrifying as that particular disease is, Russia is forcing people with more traditional and often more dangerous conditions to fight. Diseased units have become commonplace in Russia's army, as Putin has grown so desperate that he will throw any soldiers that he has into the Ukraine meat grinder, no matter how ill those soldiers might be. There may be a certain twisted logic to Putin's approach that we'll explore in just a few minutes. But as for how we know that soldiers who bleed out of the eyes will be sent to fight, Russia has given us plenty of evidence that this is precisely what it would do. Back in September, The Telegraph reported that Russia had formed entire units of sick soldiers as it pushed to take the Donetsk-based city of Pokrovsk. These soldiers had an array of often incurable conditions, such as HIV and hepatitis, and they were being sent into battle wearing special armbands that marked them out as being sick soldiers that the rest of their comrades should avoid. The Telegraph added that these so-called infected units have been formed inside Russia's 1,435th and 1,437th Motorized Rifle Regiments, and the fact that there are enough of these diseased soldiers to form entire units hints at there being an epidemic in the Russian military that Putin wants to ignore. Russian media had started to point this out, The Telegraph said in September, as reports of a hidden epidemic of illnesses affecting soldiers were making the rounds. However, those reports don't change the nuts and bolts of what Russia is doing. Putin is ordering soldiers who should be pulled from the front lines into battle, and this means that nothing is off limits for Putin in his disgusting approach to the Ukraine war. The infected units are equipped similarly to other Russian military units. In fact, their level of provision is identical and quite low. Dmytro Zhmylo, who is the executive director of the Ukrainian Security and Cooperation Center, tells The Telegraph. He adds that the only difference from the healthy military personnel of the Russian Federation is the various markings of the infected, namely the presence of special bandages. This is germ warfare, but with the interesting twist that Russia isn't using its diseased soldiers to infect Ukraine, at least not purposefully. Instead, it's using the many instances of disease that are clearly present in the Russian army as an excuse to form units that are little more than cannon fodder, the dying becoming the dead as they're sent on suicidal assaults, as it seems that Putin only sees infected soldiers as bullet sponges who exist to waste Ukraine's resources. Worryingly, Russia seems to have taken some form of inspiration from the Wagner mercenary group that has used this infected unit strategy before. That group, which has been part of Putin's war against Ukraine from the outset, set the precedent for what we're seeing now by purposefully recruiting soldiers who have diseases like HIV and hepatitis. In some cases, those soldiers were even offered antiviral medication in exchange for doing what they were told. The one thing that Russia could say about Wagner is that this group operates outside the traditional Russian military structure. That's already a spurious claim, seeing as Wagner tends to do the things that just so happen to benefit the Russian military. But even that claim is out of the window now. Wagner created the blueprint. Putin is now following it. This is an epidemic in the making, Novaya Gazeta says, and it has potentially massive consequences when you realize that it's not just diseased soldiers that Russia hires who are being placed in the infected units. Previously well soldiers who have been sent to the front are catching the diseases that the people in these units have. That alone changes everything. And by the way, you are watching The Military Show. We bring you the full picture, not just the headlines. Hit subscribe now to make sure you always stay ahead of the curve. Now, what we're seeing in the Russian military is far different from what Wagner was doing. Wagner recruited diseased soldiers. Russia seems to be making them. The occasional instance of mouse fever, as horrific as that condition may be, is nothing compared to the rampant spread of contagious and life-threatening diseases across the Russian front lines. The Lancet offered some insight into what's happening in the Russian military since Putin launched his invasion. In the fourth quarter of 2023, HIV had increased in the military by 20 times compared with pre-war figures, the medical journal reported in October 2025. It suggested several reasons why this was happening, including Russia's complete failure to provide adequate medical care to its soldiers. Far too often, single-use syringes are being used on multiple soldiers in field hospitals. It only takes one infected soldier for this ludicrous approach to medicine to become a problem, but Russia doesn't seem to be doing anything about it. Many of Russia's infected soldiers also lose access to their antiviral treatments when they're on the front lines, so they die quicker and they increase their risk of infecting their comrades. This is a symptom of Putin's utter failure to address HIV in Russia itself. The Lancet adds that data from 2023 showed that at least 16 regions of Russia had a proportion of pregnant people who have HIV above the 1% limit that is considered the threshold for a generalized epidemic. It seems that Putin has decided that the failures of the medical system at home should be amplified for the soldiers on the front lines. Why should Putin care anyway? These soldiers exist to die for his cause in his mind. Novaya Gazeta adds some more information, noting that many of the Russian soldiers who entered the military with the knowledge that they had HIV submitted false medical records so that they could score bumper paydays. Again, Putin would have been fine with that. The Kremlin wasn't going to dig too deep into the histories of the people signing up to become cannon fodder in his war. Russia's president is likely also fine with the likelihood that the officially reported HIV statistics on the front line are probably much lower than the actual figures. Novaya Gazeta adds that the real number may be as much as 45% higher than the official number of cases, but that just means more infected units can be formed to attack Ukraine. It's cold, it's callous, it's Putin all over, as Russia's leader grows increasingly desperate to get his hands on more manpower due to the abject failure of the attritional approach that Russia has taken to the war. Novaya Gazeta says that Russia's infected soldiers have been drafted by desperation, and there is perhaps no better term for it. One of the reasons why the Kremlin has been so happy to overlook falsified medical records is that Russia's army in Ukraine is now forcibly made up more of volunteers than the 300,000 reservists that Putin sent into Ukraine back in September 2022 as part of Russia's partial mobilization. Most of those trained soldiers are now gone, and that has left Russia with the volunteers. The sick, the criminally inclined, and the hopelessly addicted are being welcomed with open arms, not because they have anything of value to offer a modern military in terms of their skills, but because they're the people who are willing to take the money to die for Putin. Even that doesn't seem to be enough, though. As Euronews reports, Putin seems to be on the verge of instituting a form of rolling and non-voluntary mobilization to make up the flagging numbers in the Russian military. Who would have thought that sending sick volunteers into Ukraine so that they could infect other Russian soldiers would have been a bad strategy for maintaining high levels of manpower? If Ukraine isn't killing these soldiers first, they're dying anyway. And due to what we've seen in HIV infection rates on the front, they're taking others with them. It's not like things are going to get any better, either. As Russian Army Dr. Yevgeny Rybakov tells Novaya Gazeta, military personnel do not undergo medical examinations in combat zones. The only way to determine who is sick and with what is during rotation to the rear, and even then, once on leave, most soldiers either immediately go on a drinking binge or return home to their families and drink there. In short, soldiers are choosing vodka over medical treatment, though it's not like many have much of a choice. The same doctor says that Russia's army hospitals are already packed with the wounded, so it's not like somebody who has unknowingly picked up a disease like HIV or hepatitis is likely going to find out about it in one of those facilities. What we see here is that disease seems to be part of Putin's plan. However, we told you earlier that there was a twisted logic to what Putin is doing by forcing Russia's infected soldiers to fight. It's a dreadful plan, but it's also one that could have Putin's desired impact on Ukraine. The idea is simple. An infected Russian soldier has the chance to infect the Ukrainian. For Ukraine's soldiers, the danger that Russia's infected troops present isn't limited to bullets and drones anymore. Close contact is always going to be dangerous. Any spilled blood or other bodily fluids that happen to get on a Ukrainian soldier carry with them an inherent risk of infection. When Ukraine's soldiers are clearing trenches and buildings, close quarters combat is almost inevitable. And it's not like the armbands being worn by Putin's plague-ridden patsies are of much use. Sure, Ukraine's soldiers can identify who has an illness, but they still have to fight those troops. Not doing so would give the sick soldiers a chance to kill them first. As horrific as this thought is, it gets worse. Speaking to the European AIDS Treatment Group, the director of Ukraine's HIV charity 100% Life, Valeria Rachinska, points out that Ukrainians who are just trying to get along in the occupied territories of their country are also at risk. A silent HIV epidemic might now be raging in places like Luhansk, where testing for the condition was already faltering before Putin invaded. That epidemic may be getting fueled by infected Russian soldiers raping Ukrainian women, many of whom have to engage in forced sex work to survive. A lack of access to medications, along with the possibility of a rise in drug use among Ukrainian civilians who have had their mental health destroyed by Russia's invasion, are also problems. To anybody else, this would be brutal beyond belief. To Putin, it's a bonus that comes with sending his sick soldiers into Ukraine. Putin's problem is that this fringe benefit, as horrible as it is, doesn't outweigh the fact that disease is eating up Russia's army from the inside. Basic logic tells us that a sick soldier, especially one who is bleeding out of the eyes, isn't exactly going to be effective when squaring off against Ukraine's defenses. Again, when Putin sees these people as cannon fodder, that might not seem like an issue that makes much of a difference. However, Russia's leader can't hide from the fact that Ukraine is killing his soldiers in record numbers. Around 30,000 of Russia's soldiers were killed by Ukrainian drones alone in January, and you have to wonder how many of these soldiers were sick and how many might have survived if they were in any way fit to fight. Perhaps more worrying for Putin is the impact that the return of Russia's diseased soldiers may have. Though they're supposed to die, at least in Putin's mind, many don't. That goes especially for soldiers who have been infected on the battlefield and don't know about it. There's no way to know how many of Russia's returning soldiers are carrying deadly diseases, and that is even more damaging to Russia. After all, this is a country where fewer than 50% of HIV patients are receiving treatment for their condition anyway, says the Carnegie Endowment, and it seems unlikely that the percentage will improve when Russia's infected soldiers return. Now think about this. Right now, the country is dealing with a population crisis. The country's birth rate fell to 1.4 children per woman by the end of 2025, which is far short of the 2.0 that Putin needs it to be. Let's say the Ukraine war ends tomorrow. Hundreds of thousands of men flood back into Russia, and if Putin has his way, many of them start families that they couldn't start before due to the invasion. Suddenly, having no way of knowing how many among the returning soldiers are infected with diseases like HIV becomes a major problem. Putin's short-sighted allowance of disease to run rampant across the front lines may be creating a future in which Russians have to roll the dice on having children that could end up infected themselves. We've talked a lot about how disease is devouring Russia's army right now. But this is the future, this upcoming hypothetical time when the Ukraine war is over and the surviving infected return, many of them not knowing that they're even ill and have no way of learning. That is what Putin should be worried about. He's already broken his own military with his absurd decision to allow disease to mow down the Russian ranks. But what he doesn't realize is that he's planted the seeds for an epidemic the likes of which could destroy Russia for decades. The oldest enemy in the world has spread in the Russian army. The motherland itself may be next. Speaking of Russia's population crisis, an incoming wave of infected soldiers isn't going to do much to help a country where the numbers are already so brutal. A century of heartbreak awaits Russia as the war that Putin started is feeding into a looming problem that simply isn't going away. If you want to find out more, check out our video covering how Putin has set his country up for failure over the next 100 years. And if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to The Military Show so you don't miss analysis like this when it's posted on the channel. And thank you, as always, for watching.